This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacy.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Today, we're talking about human error, which is a major cause of GMP violations and deviations in pharmaceutical manufacturing, accounting for nearly 30% of quality defects. Efforts to investigate root causes are typically incomplete or poorly performed. Most regulatory authorities no longer accept human error as a justifiable cause of errors, making it necessary now more than ever to ensure proper systems are in place. Employees are thoroughly trained, procedures are being followed, and equipment is not deficient in any way to reduce or prevent human error. So in today's episode, we discuss this very important topic with Dr. Willis Thomas. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to have you and give you an opportunity really to share your expertise in this area with our audience. So to kick us off today, Willis, historically, prior to this global pandemic, what would you say are the most common factors noted in validation-related activities which contribute to human error?
Well, some of the challenges that I think that we're experiencing right now with respect to validation errors that occur pertain to people following the policies and procedures, right? So this is the first thing that an organization must do, is that they must reinforce the importance of following policies and procedures. And additionally, we want to ensure that the employees that are involved in the tasks are adequately trained and the training is tracked and is up to date.
Makes total sense. So now thinking about, 2020, we had this pandemic hit, and that brings about new challenges, I'm sure, as it has across the entire industry, new challenges, I'm sure, with the human error side of things. So with respect to that, how would you compare the numbers of reported human errors, especially in the areas maybe of cybersecurity, pre-pandemic versus now in the midst of this COVID crisis?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask that question, Stacy, because this week I was doing some research and there has been an astronomical increase in the number of reported human errors that can be found by citing a number of articles online. And this really raises a very important question, right? Why is there such a huge increase since the pandemic in human errors?
Yeah, exactly. So since the pandemic began, we're talking about almost exactly a year ago. Would you say that people are really thinking more about this topic of human error and, diving in? I mean, especially since we are seeing an increase in the number of reported human errors, as you just mentioned. Trying to really get at that, where people's thinking is at, right now.
Well, I think, people are finding themselves in many different circumstances. So if you think about, 2019 and you compare that to 2020, and we take a look at the work environment, right? So right. In 2019, up until March of 2020, people were more in co-located work environments. And now we've moved very rapidly to remote or virtual work environments. And some people have done this without putting into place the necessary policies and procedures to ensure, right, that there is a way to address compliance, again, adherence to policies and procedures, and making sure that we are emulating as much as we possibly can what it should be like in a co-located work environment. So in other words, just assuming that people are going to adapt immediately to a virtual work environment, especially when you're in an agile work environment, and I'll use that as an example, might not necessarily be the case. So what I'm saying is that it's really important that an organization take a look at their employees, their contractors, their resources, their suppliers and consultants, and make sure that everyone understands what expectations are, working relationships, etc. I'll give you one additional point from a major client that I had spoken with. They had expressed to me that their new onboarding process is completely virtual, right? So, when you're bringing in people completely virtual and they're not onboarding people in an office environment, in an in-person environment, then things could be missed. So in speaking to one employee, they had mentioned that they had not met anyone, right? And they would like to see org charts. They would like to understand process. They would like to understand how things work. And these things weren't done as part of the new hire orientation process, for example. So it's important that we consider all of these things when we're onboarding employees. Let's not take things for granted that people just know, right?
Right.
And making sure that we're comprehensive in our approach.
Which makes sense. And it sounds like the majority of these errors, this increased number of errors, is really due to untested processes or people not really being introduced to all of the protocols and things that they would normally get if they were hired and trained in person. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct. And some of it is that we make assumptions, right? So in other words, we assume that people will know, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, we need to have that sign right on the door that says masks required, right? Otherwise, even though people are going from one establishment to another, they might forget to have the mask. They're saying, oh, I forgot my mask in my car. Well, let me go back and get it. Right. So, something just as simple as signage, right, can't prevent human error. And when you think about masks, for example, the dynamics of not wearing masks, right? And I know that I'm not wearing one now, but, someone else is coming into a restaurant and then someone else comes in without a mask in the restaurant, then that can create a chain of events. Well, now you have the person that came in before, now they're not comfortable because someone else has come in, and now the server or wait person has to come and kindly address that person. That could create a potential conflict, right, or discomfort. So we have to remember that signage is one form of pseudo training, right, that we can have. So it's really important that we help people and ensure that they're well informed.
Thank you. So thinking about even pre-COVID, we know that training is often used to try to reduce human error. But from everything I've read, usually only about 10% of training is effective. What other methods exist? And you can give us examples, either pre-COVID or updated examples if you have them, now that we are kind of in a different environment, for really improving human performance in validation-related activities. And talk a little bit, in addition to that, about who's responsible for carrying these things out.
And so interesting that you should ask that question about training. And so we have to take a look at learning in its full context, right? So some of the traditional things that we may have become comfortable with, read and understand policies and procedures, we may need to find new ways to leverage e-learning. We may need to have other subject matter experts in the organization rotate delivery. In other words, look for additional facilitators. Maybe we have senior executives come in and share a case study as part of a learning event. but it's important that we create a passion for learning, right? So, training in its usual context of a read and understand procedure might not carry the dynamic element that really is going to encourage people to embrace it, right? So we have to figure out what is it that we can do to encourage learning in the context of people working at home, working remotely within their four walls, so that people want to open it up and really take advantage of the learning event.
I think that's so true and so important to point out now, because I don't think the read and understand method is very effective ever, because you just don't know what people's understanding is while they're reading it, right? And if they don't have that opportunity to connect and ask questions. And now, you double down, really, given the fact that we are in a time where almost everybody is working remotely and is most likely doing their training remotely. So I think your point of just having access to facilitators or trainers or other types of materials where questions can be answered, or alternate modes of delivery can be provided for people, so that they're not just relying on what they're trying to read on the internet. Hopefully that gives us a better than 10% effective rate on training, right?
Yeah, one example of what we did last year here at the PQE Group is we had role-play based training, right? So when you think about role-based training, and I says, okay, we're going to try this now, and I'm going to pick on John from Italy, right? So the person wasn't expecting that they're going to be the next role-play based scenario, but I have, facilitated discussion here with 6 different countries online. And so I pick one person. And so now everybody is thinking, oh, is Willis going to pick on me next? So I better be prepared. And so you can use things like this to make it fun, to make it engaging. The more that you can draw the audience into the training and get them to share their life experiences and also what is current, right? So what has happened to you recently? Okay, share with me how you would approach this particular challenge, is a way for us to keep people actively engaged.
Sure. Thank you. And I love that. I love that idea. I think people tend to pay a lot more attention when they're thinking, hey, I can be called on at any point in time here, right? So you're a little more focused and a lot more engaged.
Absolutely.
Willis, I was reading just last week, actually, an article that was providing some feedback on this topic. And I read that there has been a 63% increase in cybercrime since the onset of COVID. And most of the increase is due, they pointed out, to human error or lack of oversight, rather than, more skilled hackers or more people out there hacking. So given the state of things at present, it's unlikely that organizations will have significant budgetary increases, to put more money into cybersecurity. So with that in mind, should we be considering the implementation of new change management strategies to address human error, for example? And if so, what type of changes? And then I'm going to ask you in follow up to talk about how costly you think human error was in 2020. But for now, what kinds of changes or, new processes, protocols, whatever, should we be putting in place in light of the current environment?
And your question is a very good one, Stacy. And so when we talk about this, the context of cybersecurity, right?
Right.
And we think about now, many of us are becoming our own pseudo IT professionals. In other words, where you may have had I'll use the term luxury of having an IT professional in your office. Now, when you're sitting at home and you're not connected to the VPN, and if you don't have, a major program for, protecting your PC by using one of the branded software for protection, you're constantly getting invaded by spam and by ransomware and other technologies which continue to be sophisticated and are constantly phishing, right? And so it may not be as obvious when we're using our own personal laptops, which most of us now are moving to away from company branded to partially using our own personal laptops and then accessing email through webmail.
Right.
And so there are not the precautions that are there in what we had previously, pre-pandemic, is what I would call stricter, more controlled environments. Also, one important point that I would like to point out is your mobile phone is constantly being inundated. When you get something that says, well, we want to install this app, do you give us permission to allow, right? And once you say yes, well, they have all your contacts, right? So now everything that's in your phone could potentially be in the hands of someone that you do not know. This is the reason why they're giving you the app for free, right? Is because you're giving them something in exchange.
Sure.
So it's very important, right, that we have a cybersecurity plan for all of our devices, for our laptops, for our mobile phones, and that we understand how to deal with intrusion, right? And what we need to do, and then at least have a touch base with our IT department periodically in saying, okay, I want to make sure that the emails that I am sending and receiving are from me, or if they're coming from somebody else and I'm required to act on any financial information, any confidential information, any transmission of contracts and agreements, that there is some checkpoint. These are, I think, are some of the really critical questions that we need to ask is to make sure that the communications that we have in place are tested, are compliant, and are somehow checkpointed by our IT organization and that staff.
Excellent. Yeah. And so do you have a sense of how costly this, the human error was in 2020 to the industry?
Well, I mean, we can talk about cost in a number of different contexts, right?
Yeah.
So now I think we're looking at cost in terms of lives lost, right? I mean, I think here in the United States, when we take a look at the pandemic, and of course, you can put no cost or value on human life, right?
Absolutely.
So, and we can tie things back essentially to many things, to COVID-related impacts. And in other words, if we're not responsive and we take a look at things in terms of what's happening with COVID-19, what does that mean, bottom line, to our revenue, right? What does that mean in terms of our employee retention? And so I think the number is so high that we struggle to count it, right? If we were to take a look at the pandemic and we were to say how many trillions of dollars, right, have we lost in the United States, and that number continues to run off the chart. But I would say for organizations, right, we try to take a look at calculating this in terms of what we did in 2019 as compared to what we did in 2020. The hope and expectation is now that we see the impacts to the organization in 2020, we have valid data so that we can have a plan for 2021, right? This is important that we don't make the same mistakes that we made in 2020 as a result of not being prepared for the pandemic, which in all fairness, right, many of us were not, because we hadn't been through this before.
Exactly.
But now that we have, we should be in a better place to put plans in place so that we can improve our revenue stream, that we can be smarter regarding our hiring decisions and those types of matters.
Yeah. So yes, so important. So important. And so far, we've really talked about, certain protocols, procedures, policies that may or may not be properly in place. And then, of course, as we are most of us working remotely, some of it is individual blame, maybe that we can take, or between us and our company, which leads me to think about really how you can institute change or really reduce human error across an organization. And I think it comes back to the culture.
Yes.
So how does an organization's culture amidst COVID-19 play an important role really in reducing and then ultimately preventing human error?
Yeah, excellent question. So culture is a very important part of an organization, right? So when you take a look at, the culture of some of the biggest and most successful companies on the planet, right? And I'll use Amazon as an example because we have a major Amazon distribution center not far from where I'm located, and you can tell by Amazon the growth of the company, just how productive, right, this company is in terms of its delivery, and in many people questioned years ago about same day delivery, right, and so we're now getting to the point of where you can order a product and you can have it the same day, right, or you can have it without question the next day. And so I use that example because it's a really good one about productivity, right? It's a really good one about delivery. So organizations need to take a look at what they do well, right? So if your premise is quality, right, or if you're a food manufacturer and your premise is taste, right, or nutrition, and we have to make sure that our culture, right, that we have is instilling a hard work ethic. We want people to work hard as well as smart, and understand that amidst the pandemic, if we are going to succeed as an organization, then we're going to have to work smarter and harder, right? Because we see that, unfortunately, there are many businesses that are failing, right, as they look to retool themselves. And I'll use restaurants for an example, right? So we think about the culture of restaurants, and the culture for some restaurants or many restaurants has been to invite people in, have them sit down and enjoy a meal. Well, that culture now has to change to having someone who is the Uber driver, and I'll use Uber Eats as an example, to make sure that food gets there hot, right? So in other words, let's hope that this Uber driver takes this food directly to the person and there aren't 6 other pickups on the way, right? Because that's going to affect the quality of the taste of the food if I get it an hour later. Matter of fact, do I even want to order it again? So restaurants are challenged, right, in looking at all of these things, not just drive-through as a solution, but also all of the other partners that they have in coming up with a solution. And that's what change management is ultimately about. What is it that we're doing now, and what policies and procedures do we need to put in place to ensure that we are continuously improving?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then you throw in the fact that we're in a highly regulated industry, and you just have even more to think about, which leads me to my next thought, which is regulatory audits and reviews. Do you have a sense of what regulators' expectations are around human error, and what remediation strategies are going to best help an organization to reestablish a positive reputation? And then if you can start there, and then I have a couple of other caveats I want to discuss with you.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So I think from a regulator's perspective, their responsibility is to look for non-compliance and gaps, right? And so some of the things that we have to consider are how tight are the policies and procedures, the processes. In other words, in absence of this individual working on site, what has the organization done to put in place reliable methods to do things, right? So we see, for example, that there are some new trends to do things differently. I'll use the concept that became very popular last year with remote clinical trials, right? Or virtual clinical trials.
Right.
So now people are saying, well, how can we do a clinical trial remotely when we've always done these in person? What policies and procedures? So when a regulator comes in and they audit this, they're going to first go to the policies and procedures, and they're going to say, okay, what is it that you stated that you were going to do? Okay, how compliant are you to what you said that you did, right? And they're going to look at the documentation. So I'd like to refer to Alcoa Plus because that is the standard, that is the measuring stick that they're using. So regardless if we're in a co-located or on-site environment, or if we're working virtual or remote, we must adhere to the principles that are in place, right? And we must ensure that the organization is trained on these. So it comes back to training, and it also ties into commitment. So it begins with senior leadership, but it should resonate through the organization all the way down and throughout the organization, each person should be committed to the process.
Sure. Makes total sense. So now I'm thinking, in the wake of a warning letter or some sort of finding, if it comes to that, as an organization, when do we think that retraining is appropriate versus maybe some sort of changes to our workplace environment need to happen? Versus when is human error directly linked to supervisory, oversight or supervisor's performance? So thinking about those three aspects, I wanted to see if you had any insight on that.
Yeah, so I'd like to take a look at a proactive approach when we talk about training, right? Sure. So when we talk about retraining, many times the temptation is been, after there is a finding, right? Or there is an observation. And so we're saying, well, as part of this, what we'll do is we'll retrain everyone. Right. Well, that's reactive, right? And so the proactive part of this is we attend IVT conferences, right? Since 2005, as you know, I have been an advocate of IVT because of the high quality conferences that you deliver. And so now we can still do these virtually, right? So if we don't have a plan, right, for how we are going to do these yet, we have to consider how we're going to train people remotely. Mm-hmm. So people can still take advantage, for example, of going to the IVT website, reading articles. This could be a part of a meeting, right? We're saying, okay, we're going to take a look at this really good information, peer-reviewed article. We're going to take a look at this finding that's on the FDA website, and we're going to look at this in terms of a case study, right? These can be used as training events because they're real, right? We're not bringing in fictitious information, but this is current, really good information. So the first thing I think we have to do is take a look at what can we do to be proactive. And then, of course, from an audit perspective or compliance, is always going to be those reactive things that we have to address, just because we owe that to the industry, we owe that to our customers to make sure that we are fixing problems that have been identified. These things, again, we need to make sure that we have coherence from our key stakeholders. So in other words, we need to make sure that we have a vehicle for collecting information. We need to leverage surveys. We need to become very comfortable with Zoom. Okay, I'm a big advocate of Zoom meetings and getting people on camera, saying, okay, let's make sure we can see everybody's faces, we can hear everybody's voices, or your other tool of choice, GoToMeeting, WebEx. There's a lot of really good conference tools, and make sure that people are becoming really comfortable with having online conferences. We can't escape seeing each other. I know that email is important. I'm not discounting email, right, but actually seeing and hearing people and in their body language and so forth, face to face is on screen is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Willis, now, we're in 2021, and despite our best efforts, it looks like we are going to have to deal with this COVID pandemic for, several more months, if not longer. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the continued impact to the human error rate, such as underreported human error instances due to either the relaxed regulatory guidances or the emergency use, guidelines that were put into play. Do you think that that's going to have an impact on that number at all?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. And I think that, as we take a look at 2021, and my belief is that, we're seeing new strains right now of COVID-19. Right. So while the industry is working very hard, right, and I compliment Pfizer and other organizations. I actually worked for Pfizer for 10 years, and I was in the vaccines organization in New York. So I do compliment their efforts on bringing forth a quality vaccine in record time. But it's a challenge, right? So we do see that, there are many demands right now on the industry, and this may go on for some time. So in other words, we need to be prepared, right? We should be prepared, not for the best, but I would say that we need to be prepared for the worst. And think about if this does go through the end of 2021 and we start to see some lingering into 2022, what is it that we need to do to sustain ourselves, right? So it's not just about maintaining, but we're looking at this in the context of sustainability for people, for processes, for products and services that are offered to ensure that we can keep our commitments. To this end, I see that there's going to be more challenges in the area of human error. And the reason being because more and more people are working remote, are working virtual, or working under the concept of flex time, right? Where their hours may change or their working circumstances have changed significantly.
Right.
And so as people come back into the work environment, it may only be partial, right? So it's like taking somebody out of the work environment and now you're saying, okay, now it's time for you to come back to the office. That can be a culture shock for some people because they're saying, wow, when I was at home, I didn't have to deal with any politics.
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing Susie and she sneezed. Oh my gosh, I want to go back. Or I seen Mark and Mark coughed. Oh my gosh, I want to go home, right? So you have a lot of different dynamics when you're working co-located with people, right?
Absolutely. You have to learn. I mean, people are going to have to relearn how to work in a team, right? And maybe with that constant supervisory presence that they haven't had the last 12 to 18 months, right? Even though you are, everybody's doing their work and they're reporting to someone. It's not that constant oversight that you get when you're in person sometimes. So I think it's going to be a real shift for people coming back.
Right. And one of the things I would suggest, and this is just as an aside, if you've not done an escape room, these are extremely popular now in the US. There are virtual escape rooms. So people can actually, come into like a Zoom meeting or a WebEx and they facilitate these escape rooms, and it's gamification, right? So gamification at the professional level when people are saying, wow, we did this together as a team and we were only able to succeed as a team. But we have to think about team dynamics and we have to think about interpersonal relationships and understand that it's different when a person has been taken out of the work environment and has been given flexibility and a different work schedule. And at first they really didn't like it, but then they say, wow, this is really great. I mean, I've been working virtual, but now I've got to go back to the office, right? And so you have people that are going through a culture shock, right?
Right.
And we have to have ways to help people now get along again, right? Now start to really like coming together. And then also we have to have more flexibility when people are not feeling well, right? So in other words, if you're coughing, sneezing, if you've got a stomach ache, hey, it's okay to stay home. It's okay.
Right.
Well, we'll make provision for you, but not bring sickness into the office because it can disguise itself as COVID-19. And those impacts legally we have no answer for. So in other words, someone's sick, they come to the office, other people get sick. What is the liability that the organization suffers? We don't have an answer for that. So we have to really protect our employees.
Very good. Yes, I totally agree. And I think we're going to learn more about that in the coming months as organizations really are faced with this on a daily basis and have to solve these problems and come up with new policies around workplace illness and really just making whatever, sick day policies that you have in place or are putting in place, make them accessible for people so that they don't feel bad to utilizing, that privilege, I guess. We've talked a lot about different areas that we're going to have to think about as we move into 2021 and continued COVID-related impacts. What lessons learned can we take away in regard to reported errors for 2020, what we expect into 2021, and what areas can our listeners make immediate improvements to, Willis?
Okay. Well, as you know, when I finished my doctorate, my the focus of my dissertation, as you know, was on project management, and my book was on lessons learned. And I was honored to receive from the Project Management Institute Author of the Year for the book. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, right? So I think some of the lessons learned that we have, right? If I were to take some of the biggest lessons, are the importance of leadership. Right? Leadership within organizations, I think, is critical to this discussion, to make sure that leadership is sending out the right message for their organization, right? So that is going to drive what everything does. I think management supports leadership, but I think leadership has to come out and make its statement about what it is that we're doing, where are we going, and how does this impact the culture of our organization. So leadership needs to have a plan for what it's going to do to address this pandemic. We're now in January, so it's not too late. If leaders are saying, okay, we don't have a plan, we're just kind of going along with the flow, take a look with what other organizations are doing, right? If they don't have the answer for this, and saying, okay, here is a plan that we're going to have that aligns to how we're going to work remotely, or how we're going to work better, or how we're going to assist our project teams in becoming more effective. And we don't have to do it all at once, right? But we have to figure out those key points that we should focus on, and we have to move the business forward, right?
Right.
So this is really helpful to organizations to setting the tone. If leadership comes out and speaks about it and talks about it and says, hey, this is not something that we have to be scared of, but we do need to pay attention to it, that's going to mean a lot to employees when they think about, what does COVID-19 mean to me this year? Am I going to have a job here, right? Those kinds of things. And so leadership has to have the right messaging, right, to drive the business forward.
So true. Yeah, so true. Well, you've provided some great insights for us today, Willis. It's been great to have you here, and really to help us think more productively about this next year and how we are going to move forward despite this continued COVID pandemic here. And as we wrap up today, I just wanted to see if you had any final thoughts or takeaways that you'd like to leave our audience with.
Yeah, so I would just like to encourage people to have a learning plan, right, for 2021. As I mentioned, IVT conferences are the best in the business. And each year, I always enjoyed putting on my calendar and getting together with my friends. And I've made many friends at IVT conferences and saying, hey, in June, I'll be going to Belgium, and I've had the opportunity to speak in different countries for IVT. And so we still have to make sure that our learning, right, for 2021 is interesting, is fun, is enjoyable, and all those things. So take a look on the IVT website, figure out how you can network despite the challenges that we might have of just doing things virtually or remotely, because this is an important thing for us to continue to grow in our knowledge, right? It's all about what we learn each and every day. And in this industry, in order for it to continue to mature, we have to learn something new every day. So whether it's articles on the IVT website, or if it's, participating in a conference, or looking for an opportunity to do a speaking engagement, or this opportunity for a podcast, as I'm here with you today, right? Just to be able to share, this will be very valuable for us.
Cheers to that. I appreciate the plug. We are doing our best to continue to provide, conferences, virtually webinars, and a host of other ways of getting information out there, be it our journals, these podcasts, our blogs, et cetera. So I appreciate you mentioning that and letting people know we are here for them to help them learn and grow and really stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in the industry. So Absolutely. Thank you again, Dr. Willis Thomas, for being our guest today. It's been great to have you this week.
Hey, have a great day.
Thanks. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Lastly, our humble appreciation to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions, you can message us via LinkedIn or through our website. If you enjoyed today's episode, head on over to your podcast player of choice and subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Plus, don't forget to share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. We appreciate your help in spreading the word. For today's show notes and resources from this episode, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great discussion. Until then, make it a great week.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.